Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and now of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. As always, we've got our producer, Justin Stein, with us, and we are here to talk about the most important games of Week 5. I hope they're going to happen, Aaron.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. I await sort of with bated breath, constantly updating Twitter for some sort of news about the Tennessee Titans. The Patriots also to a lesser extent, but at this point, I mean, the Patriots outbreak is 3 players. The Tennessee outbreak is like 20 people, including, I think, 11 players and 9 personnel, or I might have that the wrong way around. It might be 9 players and 11 personnel, but either way, it's a lot of people.
It's too many people. There was the news about them having some sort of a practice gathering at like a high school field or whatever it was. And that's alarming and poor decision-making, to say the least. It's really disappointing what's going on there. And I am nervous about the Patriots situation because the fact that they were all clear and now they aren't again, and in between they played a football game, I'm holding my breath a little bit that we don't find things out. And even on the Chiefs side of things.
You mean like the pictures of Gilmore and Mahomes shaking hands after the game don't encourage you?
You know, if you watch like Premier League soccer, they've been doing this for months and all this kind of stuff. And you see people hugging, and then you turn on the NBA and you don't even think about that sort of stuff.
The NBA is different because they're in a bubble.
They're in a bubble. And so I get it. And I'm not trying to, I don't want to criticize people. This isn't easy for anybody. But, yeah, I'm nervous. The
tough part is figuring out what to do about the Titans. There really are no good answers. Lots of things have been suggested, certainly taking away draft picks and fines, but that doesn't really punish the players for having this workout to take away future draft picks. And some people suggest that's not enough. But then you get to the question of forfeiting games. And it's like, why should Buffalo benefit because Tennessee couldn't get their act together? Well, first of all, why should Buffalo benefit and Pittsburgh not benefit, right? If you're going to forfeit the game against Buffalo, you really need to go back and forfeit the game against Pittsburgh. But then that's also unfair to the teams that are going to be competing with Buffalo, whether it's the Patriots competing for a division title or Kansas City or Indianapolis competing for the number 1 seed in the AFC if the Bills beat out the Patriots for the division title, which, the odds say is likely to happen at this point.
Yeah, I'm interested. I haven't totally thought it through. Is there an alternative where, as opposed to a forfeit, the game is not played and it doesn't count?
That's a possibility. I think that is a little bit more fair. Now, that's got its downside too, because then Buffalo can be like, okay, well, the end of the year comes. Let's say we're 11-4. Kansas City is 12-4, and we didn't have a right to tie Kansas City, and beat them with a tiebreaker or something because we have 1 fewer game, and that's not fair to us. There's really no way to do it that's fair to everybody. If you don't play the games, you're either going to artificially benefit the teams that played more games or you're going to artificially benefit the teams that didn't play more games, depending on whether you give Buffalo a win for this or not. I think the only way to do it is to add weeks to the end of the season and move the playoffs back. It's a little easier to do this year because my guess is that it's not hard to reserve hotel rooms for the Super Bowl because I don't even know if there's going to be fans at the Super Bowl. And if so, it's not going to be a full stadium. We're not all going down to Tampa the way we usually do. We're not going to have parties before the Super Bowl like we usually do.
It wouldn't be dumb for them to think about doing a playoff bubble even for football.
No, that wouldn't be dumb at all. That's what baseball is doing. And if you move the weeks back, I mean, it's hell on me and my systems. And anybody who does, analytic, all of our systems are built for 17-week seasons. But it seems to me to be the best way to get all these games in. And actually, not that this is somebody from whom quality suggestions normally come, but Mad Dog Russo had an interesting suggestion, which was push week 17 back and add games before week 17 so that you don't end up with a situation where you have like whoever's the number 1 seed not playing for 3 or 4 weeks at the end of the season.
I follow that. I'm interested in any plan that, we don't have to actually end up canceling any games. I think if it did come down to it and they had to cancel this, I don't think it would be fair to award a forfeit. I think the more I think it through kind of live with you here, I think it would be more fair to just say this doesn't count for anybody. And, sorry, Buffalo, but we added a 7th playoff team this year. So everybody's got their chance in the postseason. And yeah, it might cost you the number 1 seed versus the number 2 seed and the bye. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that. But at the same time, everybody gets a chance to play in the playoffs. If you're making the playoffs, I think compared to what the NBA and MLB have been through, that wouldn't be such a big change.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of trying to play every game. But I said before the season, I thought we would get through the season. I didn't know if we would get through the season with every team playing all 16 games. And that may be the situation.
Where are you at on the idea of the Titans shutting it down completely? I've heard that mentioned.
Yeah, that's Doug Farrar's suggestion. That seems a little extreme to me. It seems sort of unfair to Tennessee fans who it's not the fans' fault that this happened. And not to mention just the inconsistency of having 13 teams, including teams that will then have 14-game seasons because they're AFC South rivals. And if you're Jacksonville, Jacksonville's probably not going to be in contention, but still it's we had to lose to Tennessee, but Houston and Indianapolis get 2 free games. Houston and Indianapolis would now play 14-game seasons. It would be, again, there's no good answers, but I'm not in favor of shutting the Titans down for the whole year.
Yeah, that seems like a code of Hammurabi a little bit there. Might be coming down a little bit harder than we need to, but who knows? All right, let's talk football, shall we?
Let's talk about games that are actually, or at least we hope, actually going to happen.
For sure. What is number 1 on the list of the most important games of the week?
This is a pretty intriguing one, actually, and it's Indianapolis at Cleveland. Cleveland makes the playoffs 66% of the time with a win, 39% with a loss. Indianapolis, 84% with a win, 63% with a loss. If you're wondering about the difference there, it's a combination of, 1, Cleveland being in the same division as both Baltimore and Pittsburgh, but 2, the fact that our playoff odds are based on the ratings that incorporate the preseason projections. So not only has Indianapolis been better than Cleveland so far this year, but obviously our projections going into the season had Indianapolis better than Cleveland, and it's way too early to fully give up on all of our prior knowledge. That being said, this is a really interesting matchup, especially because of what Cleveland's done in the run game versus the fact that the Colts have the top defense in the league so far this year.
Yeah, here we are at the quarter poll, and we'd like to check in at that point. Both of these teams started with bad week 1 games. Cleveland, new coach, got crushed by Baltimore. And then Indianapolis, with the new quarterback, they lost to a Jaguars team that killed a lot of people's survivor pool entries. That said, since then, both these teams, the Cleveland, they get their offense back on track largely because they had home games against Cincinnati and Washington. But then we saw what they did against the Cowboys last week as well. And then the Colts rolled off 3 straight wins, mostly on the defensive side. They've only allowed 29 points over in the last 3 weeks. So as you mentioned before, Indy's been near the top of the DVOA leaderboard throughout the year. The Browns kind of creeping up the list. Just from a narrative standpoint, both teams riding the 3-game winning streaks after the questionable start that made you question whether the pieces were going to fit together. I'm really fascinated to see how this one goes.
The Colts have the top defense of the league, but I will point out they're only 16th in adjusted line yards on defense, which suggests that the Browns should be able to run on them. And given how well the Browns have been running this year, the overall on run defense, the Colts are better than that, but that's because they've prevented long runs, not because they've prevented regular steady gains. And what's good, the Colts pass defense has been really good. Xavier Rhodes, who looked like burnt toast last year in Minnesota, is averaging only 6.8 yards per target compared to 9.8 yards per target last year.
Yeah, we know the Colts like to sit in their cover too. They've mixed it up a little bit so far this year, and just from a talent perspective, I think they've got the players back there, and then what they've done up front to kind of fill out with DeForest Buckner.
Buckner's obviously a big addition.
It's the perfect fit for them. So yeah, we've got them at the 4th ranked pass defense, and I'm with you there on Xavier Rhodes. He's been resuscitated. Meanwhile, you look on the other side, the Browns 29th in pass defense. So a little bit of a mismatch there, but watch out for Myles Garrett. We have him leading the NFL in pass rush points saved.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's sort of been a one-man gang. Cleveland is only 20th in adjusted sack rate, despite having 11 sacks because they face so many pass plays. So it's like all Garrett. He's not getting a lot of help from the rest of the pass rush, but he's been awesome.
He's been awesome. The rest of the defense, not so much. I did do a little bit of a deeper dive into the run game because I was curious about that, especially with the injury to Chubb and how that might affect things. The Browns' run game is 7th in EPA this year, and their running backs have been responsible for a league-leading 19 total points earned on the ground so far this year. That's got Chubb written all over it, but that's been all of their running backs, and obviously we know they have depth. Meanwhile, the Colts are surprisingly low on the rushing EPA list. We have them second to last in rushing EPA, including just 34% of plays with a positive EPA. So the Browns have more yards after contact than all but 10 other teams have total yards so far this year. So that's how much the Browns have been doing, including Chubb, after contact there. That said, I don't know how sustainable that is, especially with Chubb out. I'm looking for Indy to maybe more find their legs. I think that they're better than second to last in rushing EPA. And I think once they do find their legs, it'll really help Rivers and the way he fits into their offense. And I'm curious, I don't know if the Browns offensive line can continue to gel under the scheme as they appear to have done against the bad defenses in the last 3 weeks, or if just DeForest Buckner, Darius Leonard and company are just going to be too much for them. And then no Chubb, that could be a big problem.
Yeah, everybody's raving about this guy, Wyatt Teller, who is their right guard, who has come from out of nowhere to have a really good early part of the season, but he has to go up against Buckner now. It might be, we'll have to see, but it might be the kind of thing where like the positive plays, they're outweigh the negative plays. But I don't know how many negative plays Cleveland's had on that offensive line, given how many rushing yards that they've gotten.
Right. Now, if they're running behind him, he'll get credited for that in total points. We've got him with 5 blown blocks so far this year, 2 in the pass game, 3 in the rush game, and also 4 penalties, including 2 holds. So maybe a deeper dive at the numbers there shows why he's not at the top of our total points earned list. He's tied with Treader and Conklin, actually. They all have 7 points earned amongst the Browns offensive linemen.
Browns offensive line is playing really good.
The 2021 edition of the Bill James Handbook is available for order from actasports.com. This year's book features lots of great insights. Bill invented a new stat to measure game score for batters. We look at the impact of the rule changes made in the shortened season and the weird stats that a short year creates. Speaking of stats, we've got lots of them. Career and year-by-year totals for every major leaguer, plus deep dives into defensive runs saved, RBI percentages, shifts, the Hall of Fame, and more. Plus, the first set of hitter and pitcher projections for the 2021 season. That's the Bill James Handbook 2021 edition, available at actasports.com, where you can get 10% off and free shipping. Order today.
All right, what do we have coming up next?
Speaking of teams that let Cleveland run all over them, the next game is the New York Giants at Dallas. And I believe I sent this to you by email with the line, no, seriously, it is. This game really is really important for the playoffs. Not for the Giants, who are pretty much out of it. They get in 19% of the time if they win, 5% if they lose. But because every division game is so important for the Giants and Eagles going forward to win the NFC East, so Dallas is in 60% of the time if they win, 33% of the time if they lose.
Yeah, the Giants sit, just a game and a half out of first place at 0-4?
Yeah, but based on how good the teams have been so far and projecting that forward, it looks like it's still Dallas's division to lose. But they seem to be able to try to lose it. I mean, they've lost games in such weird ways, and they certainly have not played up to their talent so far this season, and especially on defense. I mean, the defense has been really poor against the run, against the pass. They're 24th overall, 25th against the pass, 23rd against the run. There's a real example here of the resistible force and the movable object, because the Giants' offense is dead last in basically every category, especially adjusted line yards. So Dallas, just like Cleveland, run all over them, and the Giants haven't been able to run all over anybody.
Yeah, it looks like it should be theoretically a lot of offense in this one based on the way the defenses look this year. But as you mentioned, the Giants' offense has also really struggled this year. This has to be the last time that we'll talk about one of the New York teams this year. in terms of any sort of a playoff or Super Bowl odds conversation. They've both just been so atrocious this year. One thing that was interesting that stuck out to me as I started to look into this matchup is while the Cowboys have had all kinds of passing volume this year, right? Dak Prescott's on pace for all kinds of yards. And the Giants are one of just 6 teams with a negative expected points added passing this year. That's how bad they've been. In terms of total points, Dak Prescott is in 24th place, which is just 1 spot ahead of Daniel Jones in passing total points. So that makes sense, but only when you consider that the Cowboys have the second most receiving value created this year, and the Giants have the least, right? The Cowboys easily lead the NFL in both yards after catch and yards after contact after the catch, to the point where they have more yards after the catch than a lot of teams have total passing yards this year. So when you add all that together, as surprising as it was, the division of credit really shows that the Cowboys are doing, A, just a ton of passing from a volume perspective, and B, the receivers are getting a lot of yardage after the catch. But in terms of the passing total points, it hasn't been the same as you would say if you just looked at, it's why we don't look at how much yardage a quarterback got and try to rank them based on that alone. One guy who's been really impressive from the Cowboys, and when I say receivers, I mean running backs and tight ends too, Dalton Schultz has had a really impressive start to the season. A guy I wasn't super familiar with heading into the year, and he's had a nice start. And Prescott's been one of these weird quarterbacks that we see who has a lower independent quarterback rating. So when you incorporate the drops, than his regular quarterback rating. So that's an indicator that he's potentially been somewhat lucky this year in terms of the way that things have panned out in the traditional stats. And we could see a bit of a regression there. I'm just not betting on it in this game.
No, and I also think, the longer-term view of Prescott is probably better than the shorter-term view of Prescott in that way. Like, you may see a regression based on the numbers from this year, but based on what he did last year, I think you would see improvement. And the Giants have actually been pretty good against tight ends so far this year, speaking of Dalton Schultz. But I just think they don't have really depth in the secondary. They're 31st against what we call other receivers, so guys who aren't in the top 2. And I would think that, I don't know who counts as the third receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, whether it's CeeDee Lamb or Michael Gallup, but I have a feeling that one or both of those guys is going to have a big game.
Yep, the Cowboys have been spreading it around to a lot of different guys. It's going to continue. The Giants' pass defense, we have them 22nd in the NFL in points saved. If anything can get Daniel Jones going, it's the Cowboys, who've been the worst pass defense in the league by points saved. And then in terms of run defense, the Cowboys, we're also got them 30th in the league in run defense points saved. So if anything can help it's the Giants' offense, it's the Cowboys. And if there's any bright spot in this game defensively, it's probably the Giants' run defense, which has been pretty good so far this year. We've got them 10th in run defense points saved, but you can tell just based on what I'm bringing up that the NFC East has been really bad. Yeah,
and this is a good chance for Dallas to get its pass rush going because Andrew Thomas leads the league. He's the rookie left tackle for the Giants, leads the league with 14 blown blocks and 5 sacks allowed and has negative points earned on the SIS data hub. So Dallas, of course, is in ESPN's pass rush win rate is 31st, but the Giants are 30th in pass block win rate. So again, we have here the movable object and the resistible force.
Andrew Thomas, a prospect that I love for the Giants. Trevon Diggs, a prospect I love for the Cowboys. Both those guys have had really difficult starts to the season. They've certainly been thrown in, head first and no preseason. So it's been unenviable for them. And I don't think the story is written on their careers, but it's been rough so far for both of those guys.
Well, for almost everybody wearing a Giants uniform, really.
Yeah, so we'll be shocked if the Giants win this game, right? So after all the things that are going on so far with the Cowboys, we think they win this game, and they're probably going to be back at this 60% playoff team, and like you said, in the driver's seat in the division.
Yeah, I mean, they're a half game behind the Eagles right now, but they've been so much better than the Eagles so far this year. Dallas is 16th, Philadelphia 30th by DVOA. I still think Dallas is the favorite in this division. But they do not look like the team we thought they were going to be. We thought they were going to be a Super Bowl contender, and they don't look like it.
And Daniel Jones has made it further into the season than Sam Darnold, he and Sam Darnold rather have made it further than Dwayne Haskins.
I was going to say Darnold got hurt. Darnold is not going to start this week, but that's because of an injury. That's not because
totally separate situation. I just thought it was fascinating that Haskins hasn't been good either. I wonder how long the leash is. I guess when it's the owner's guy, you never know with the quarterbacks when they're going to bench him.
To talk briefly about the Washington situation, there is a way in which pulling Haskins makes sense. Because of the fact that the division looks so bad, Washington does have a chance to go to the playoffs. And if you truly think that Kyle Allen is better than Haskins, then you sacrifice Haskins' development for a chance to make the playoffs this year. I just don't think that Allen is truly better than Haskins.
If they're done with Haskins, if they've evaluated him and that's that, and they've seen enough that they need to see, it's hard to argue with the decisions that they want to make. They're in there watching them at practice every day, and they have a better understanding of how they're playing. But it is hard from an outside perspective when you're not in there every day to wrap your head around, really, we're going to Kyle Allen. Like, what's the upside here?
And if Alex Smith is healthy enough to be active, then Alex Smith is healthy enough to be your starter. And Alex Smith is the best quarterback of those three.
It's definitely confusing that he would be healthy enough to be the backup and not healthy enough to start. I'm with you there.
All right, let's go from really questionable quarterback situations to the surest quarterback situation in the league with our last preview for the week, the most important game for Super Bowl odds, which is Las Vegas at Kansas City. Vegas makes the Super Bowl 2.3% of the time when they win, 0.7% if they lose. That's not why we're talking about this game. We're talking about Kansas City. 36% of the time they make the Super Bowl with a win in this game, 27% if they lose. Kansas City, the clear favorite now in the NFL, not just because how they've played this year, but because they rank 31st in remaining schedule by opposing DVOA, which means they are the clear favorites to win the number one seed and get the bye in a way that no team in the NFC can match.
For all the talk, Russell Wilson has probably been the MVP through the quarter point. Good argument for Aaron Rodgers. In terms of the best quarterback in the world, I still like Patrick Mahomes to keep that title. And for that reason, I feel like we do have a pretty good feel for who the Chiefs are. So you mentioned in terms of Super Bowl odds, that's why we're talking about them. But that's why we've also talked about them so many times before. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what to make of the Raiders on the other hand. So they start the season with wins against two NFC South teams, including an impressive win against the Saints, but then the 6 and 7 point losses to the two better AFC East teams. And, it seems like on paper you would think at the Super Bowl champs, at Patrick Mahomes, it's a tall task. But they're heading into the bye next week, and I'm wondering, just knowing Gruden a little bit, he's been on our TV screens long enough that we're very familiar with him. I'm wondering if there's something that he's got up his sleeve to try to steal one. I hate to mention it. There is also a non-zero possibility that Mahomes or somebody else on the Chiefs contracts COVID, and this game could be affected, which would certainly help the Raiders' chances if they ended up playing. But I'm wondering if there's something to be said here, because on paper, I don't see it, but maybe there's something that Gruden's doing here where it's kind of all chips on the table against the Chiefs.
Well, we talk about Derek Carr like he's so mediocre, and we all know that he throws short. But I will say a couple of things. The first is that, as I noted last week, and we had a little bit of a discrepancy here, if you include defensive pass interference penalty, Derek Carr's average depth of target is much higher than it's been in previous years. We had a discrepancy there because of whether you include the DPIs or not, but he's gotten a few really deep throw DPIs this year.
I called Aaron after we recorded last week, and I said, I think something's wrong.
Yeah, and it turned out that was the discrepancy between our numbers was the DPIs. But passing is the one thing the Raiders do well. They are 30th in DVOA defense against both the run and the pass, and they are 29th running the ball, but 7th passing the ball. That's the one thing they do well. However, Kansas City is number 1 in DVOA pass defense this year. I know that sounds, like a shocker, and maybe it's a little bit skewed because we're opponent adjusting them for playing the Patriots, but they played the Patriots backups, not the Patriots starter. But still, it's that pass defense has been really good this year. Now, Legeria Sneed, the rookie, has been really good, 5.8 yards per pass, but he broke his collarbone. He's out now. But Rashad Breeland comes back from his suspension, and then they have Rashad Fenton, who's allowing just 4.3 yards per pass, and Charvarius Ward is allowing just 4.2 yards per pass. So the Kansas City pass defense has been really strong this year.
So really, really interesting because you brought up a lot of the points that I was going to think about. These are both teams moving the ball through the air offensively. Carr keeps putting up the big numbers, traditional or advanced stats, by the way. No matter how you look at it, really, It's the same story as far as what he produces, everything except the eye test. And then neither team really moving much on the ground so far this year. But I looked into the Chiefs' pass defense because in terms of EPA allowed, they're also second in the NFL. On passing plays, the Chiefs are second in the NFL on EPA allowed behind only the Colts.
Okay, so that would suggest that it's not about opponent adjustment, certainly, because that's not an opponent-adjusted number.
Right. And I was as fascinated by that as you are. So we looked a little bit deeper into that, and we started splitting things out in terms of points saved. And it turns out that it's really that they've created a lot of value on passing plays through pass rush. So it's been the ability to get pressure on the quarterback that's really led to that low EPA number. Whereas in terms of pass coverage, we see them as middle of the road in terms of points saved, which is an interesting thing because I haven't done so much splitting out of when EPA as a whole is kind of unexpected and trying to look into what's going on kind of beneath the numbers there. But in terms of points saved, it's been their pass rush that's been really good and has kept their pass coverage kind of above water in terms of their production.
Well, it's interesting. It could be that their yards per pass numbers are so low because of passes that are incomplete due to pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's not a number that's adjusted for pressure. So certainly that's the story. You can tell the story where points saved suggests it's more about the pass rush, yet the fact is that their cornerback coverage stats are also really good.
Right. The pass rush, what Points Saved would say is that the pass rush has been responsible for a lot of those incompletions as opposed to tight pass defense, PBUs, and forced throwaways, things like that.
The other thing I'll say is the offensive line for the Raiders has kind of struggled this year with blown blocks. Gabe Jackson is a little off his game. Colton Miller struggles with blown blocks. So, that's an area that's usually a strength of Vegas that hasn't been. And I think that's part of the ranking 29th in rushing.
Yeah, there's not a lot of good news. If there's any piece of good news for the Raiders, it's maybe that when you split out, if they can find a way to control the pass rush, that maybe they can get after that Kansas City secondary. I wouldn't really bet my money on the Chiefs defense being the part of the team that I'm willing to bet on as being there week to week throughout the year. So maybe the Raiders can get it done that way. But when you flip it on the other side, they're 25th in EPA on pass plays allowed in pass coverage, including second to last in coverage points saved and sixth from the bottom in pass rush points saved. So I don't know how they get it done on the other side of the ball. It's very hard to think of a way that they.
No, they have no pass rush at all. Vegas has no pass rush at all. And the one defensive lineman who people feel is playing pretty well, Maurice Hurst, is, I believe, now on the COVID list.
I guess Derek Carr's just got to put the team on his back.
That's not a phrase you hear often, but yes, Derek Carr has to put the team on his back.
It'll be fascinating to watch. All right, let's hope we got everybody healthy so that we can.
Let's hope all these games happen.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you to all of our listeners. You can subscribe, rate, and review. Please tell your friends, let them know about the Off the Charts Football Podcast. As always, footballoutsiders.com has tons of great content. You can follow Aaron at FB Outsiders or at FO_A Shots. Aaron, what's going on Football Outsiders this week?
Film Room looks at what Joe Brady has done to make the Carolina Panthers offense surprisingly good despite the absence of McCaffrey. And I have a big ESPN article with surprise stats for all the NFC teams, things that we didn't expect going into the season, and are they likely to continue for the rest of the year?
That should be good stuff. I've always been a big Teddy Bridgewater guy, so I'm happy to see them having a little bit of success in there. I've been really surprised that they've been able to kind of stay with teams defensively.
And if you, that's the surprise to me because we had them projected as the worst defense in the league. So there'll be a little bit of a test with Atlanta this week, but then Atlanta, right? They may be without Julio Jones again. So I don't know how much of a test it's going to be. And the other thing about the Panthers is they are representing big time for team running backs that don't matter because their offense has been fine without McCaffrey.
I still can't. I don't think I can sign off on Christian McCaffrey not mattering. But
I know it's tough to sign off on, but the fact is their offense has been fine without him. Like
it goes to what we know. Passing is more important than running in the modern NFL, and you don't have to be an analytics guy to understand that.
I mean, Mike Davis is not having certainly the receiving value that McCaffrey has, but they're getting it done on the ground, and they're getting it done to Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore.
I should also mention Sports Info Solutions is on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS. You can check out the free SIS Data Hub by visiting sisdatahub.com. And you can check out the Data Hub Pro by visiting pro.sisdatahub.com. Free trials of that are available. From my co-host, Aaron Schatz, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.